Trauma. Everyone has it. No one talks about it. It seems easier to stay silent, ignore it, or stuff it than it does to honor it, learn from it, and finally heal. Trauma is debilitating, yet so often we suffer in silence. Trauma is not meant to be battled alone, and we are no longer going to suffer in silence. Together, we are creating a safe place to speak, to share our stories, and grow our strength as we heal. Together, we are giving a voice to those who have been silenced, bringing darkness into light, and letting God use our stories. Today, we find ourselves again. We relight our spark and let it light up the world. Stop Sis is a nonprofit organization dedicated to educating on issues of trauma and trafficking, as well as the amazing power of the healing journey. Welcome to Stop Sis. Hey, you guys. Thank you so much for coming back to Stop Suffering in Silence. This is episode 3, and my name is Denise Walsh. I'm a former clinical psychologist turned dream life coach, and I am here with Miss Rachel Timothy.
Hi, guys. Thanks so much for coming back.
In this episode, we are going to talk about the myths of justice. Now, if you have missed the first 2 episodes, I recommend going back and listening, because all of these will kind of compound on each other as we continue the discussion of trauma and trafficking. I do want to give a disclaimer that if you've got kids in the room or have experienced trauma yourself, just know that some of this conversation could certainly be triggering, and we want to be mindful of that. Today, we are going to talk about the myths of justice, because oftentimes we think that, like, if something bad happens, go to the police and they will take care of it, and they will put the bad guy in jail and everyone will be safe again. But coming from working within the system as a clinical psychologist, and I'm guessing that most people working in the system could agree with me to say that the system is certainly broken in a lot of spots and doesn't actually offer a victim the solace they're looking for. And so today we are going to talk about what actually happens. Certainly not all the time. Every story is different, but Rachel is going to share some of her experience when she has gone to the police, gone to her church family, and gone to friends and family and started telling them what happened. And so, Rachel, I want to start with this. When you came to speak at my house, my mom was there, and she went home and told my dad. And my dad said, well, just go to the police and they'll take care of it. And I just think that that's a lot of what most people think happens. And so when you started remembering your abuse and you started going to get help, and I know you went to the police at some point, tell me a bit about what you thought would happen versus what actually did happen.
Well, so when I ended up going to the police, it was not something I wanted to do, because I was still very trauma brain and felt like I somehow was going to get in trouble, because that's what they, these abusers, they'll use anything and everything to get you to stay quiet. And so I was convinced that, number 1, people won't believe me. Number 2, they'll think I'm crazy. And number 3, I'll be the one that ends up in jail. And so going to the police the first few times, I went kicking and screaming. I did not want to. But I had friends around me, and, for me, I was in a fog and could not see clearly. They, however, were not traumatized, so they could see clearly. So I put my trust in them in going to the police. And honestly, anytime anybody hears my story, that's their first thing. We got to get justice. We'll try it this way. We'll do this. We'll talk to this. I know this police officer. He'll take care of this. And I can name only a few officers who actually were helpful out of dozens that I have encountered. And so the first few times that we went to the police, like I remember the first time going to state police, Nobody was allowed to go with me. Two men came and got me, walked me down this long hallway, put me in this tiny room, put a camera on me, and wanted me to tell them my story. Well, a camera in and of itself is very triggering for me because there was so much videotaping and photography and things involved in my abuse and being alone with two men. And it was almost like, so that it was almost like a good cop, bad cop. There was one that sat close to me that was showing emotion, showing like he cared, that he just wants to help me. And then there was a cop behind him who had a notepad who would write, and then he would look at me and he'd like roll his eyes, or he'd be like this, and then he would keep writing. And so I'm seeing both sides of it. And I mean, it was hard. It was very difficult. And then I remember as I'm explaining at one point, one of the cops said to me, well, were you cold? And I was like, I don't remember. Well, how do you not remember that? It was like February night. You should have been cold. And so then I start picking up on their questioning me. And this is exactly what my perpetrator said would happen. And so I start retracting and like, holy cow, I am going to jail. They were right, that sort of thing. That's just one example.
Yeah. Okay. So you go in and the goal is to kind of press charges or get the conversation started of there's bad guys out there. You need to know this. And this is your job to know that bad guys are out there and then go get them.
Yep.
But the questioning and the way they've gone about even asking your story is intimidating.
Oh, very intimidating. Yeah. And it makes you feel shame again and confusion again. And mind you, like as you're trying to explain to these people what happened, you're seeing it, you're reliving it in your head. And but then you're being judged as you're reliving it. And it's almost like you're having to prove to them you're legit.
It's okay. So I mean, it's really hard to respond when you're just like, this should not be the way it goes. But I know that your story is not unique, that there's that justice in sexual assault is really hard to, because you need DNA evidence or you need proof of some sort. Otherwise it turns into a he said, she said type of experience. But for a survivor who is experiencing trauma brain, fight or flight mode in kind of the like, the physical symptoms, the heart racing, the stomach, anxiety, getting the words out is hard enough,
Yeah.
let alone having you feel like you're being attacked or judged along the way.
Right. Right. And your memory of the event, I mean, your body is in like shock in the moment. And to be able to replay A to Z, this is what happened, it's just not going to happen that way. And, you might mix and jumble up pieces of it. And somebody who understands trauma gets that. You're not going to fully understand the whole thing that happened. You're not going to be able to replay it in your mind like a movie. But whenever law enforcement's not trauma informed, they're just going off the facts, then the victim ends up not wanting to come forward because they're not believed.
And oftentimes traumatized again.
I really was. Every single time I went, I was re-traumatized. And you think to yourself after a while, okay, maybe it'll be worth it this time. Maybe this time something good will come from it. And up until this point, nothing good has come from it, truthfully. I luckily that first time, I guess I say luckily, but they believed me enough to go do a raid on the perpetrator's house. And I was told by 4 police officers that they found child porn in the person who had abused me's house, and that it was just a matter of time. It was going to be an open and shut case. And I mean, I was ecstatic because I knew they would find child porn there. And so then time passed and I didn't hear anything. And I call up to, at this point, it had gone up to the FBI because it was that type of a case. And I call up to the FBI, and the agent who was on my case said the forensic guy called and he says, this has never happened before, but the evidence is gone. And just like that, I mean, the perpetrator in my situation was a teacher, he was a coach, he was an elder. And without that evidence that went, I never even really got a good explanation if it went missing, if it was like, I don't know. But without that, he could go right back to teaching, right back to being around kids. I look like, I'm the one that lied, or it's a he said, she said. Well, without that evidence, they believe him. But I mean, you
Only had one copy of the evidence. I mean, I think you probably don't have this information, but it's shocking that that could be suddenly lost in a police station.
And this is not like, I'm not the only person who heard it, like I feel like I have to like prove that, but I mean, Granny was there with me. She heard it out of their mouth as well. And so, yeah, it was devastating. And it was just really difficult. I don't know, when you think of the FBI, you think they've got it all together. And you could think conspiracy theory too. You could think, hey, maybe there was somebody in there who got rid of it purposefully. Maybe it really was an accident. I have no idea. I just know it was there and then it wasn't.
Right. Tell me about a story when you went to the police and it was helpful.
Okay, so there was one FBI agent, and she was a female, and she was like what you would picture in the movies, and just an amazing lady. And so she would listen to me, and you could just tell she believed, like she had the sympathy, emotions, the feelings, but she put it into action. Like she would take what I told her and look into it. I can't even tell you how many times I would tell people information, and maybe they would act like they care or don't, but they don't look into it. So, they really don't believe you. She did. And just with information I was able to give her, she put connections together. Like she really dug deep into it and was able to put bank account connections together of these certain people spending money and sending money to people. And she told me at one point, she said, this ring, from what she had figured out, went all the way down into Mexico. She goes, Rachel, this is a big ring. And I was like, no, I know. But she looked into it. I haven't had anybody else do that. So one of the things that I have found is I will go to a police station, and I had multiple times that I was hurt. So I had multiple times that I needed to go to the police station. And even though I didn't want to, I had Granny there saying, we are going to stop these guys. This is not okay. And so she would pull me back into a police station. And I mean, I would go willingly, but not with much hope. And so we would tell these police officers my story. And every single time they would say, we got this. We're going to get these guys. And next thing we know, hold on. I'm sorry.
Work from home life.
Sorry. So sorry.
That's okay.
But anyway, so every single time that we would then tell the police, they would say, we're on it. We're going to get them. We're going to set up a sting. We're going to do this, that, and the other. And next thing, like the very next day, they wouldn't return our calls. I mean, literally every single time.
So when the agent that finally believed you and started really investigating and found that it went all the way down to Mexico, what happened with all of the evidence she collected?
She ended up getting transferred to a different town, and I've contacted her, and my investigators contacted her. And what she's told us is she has put all of that evidence in a file, and it is sitting on somebody's desk at the FBI agency. They just need to open it and do something with it. So.
And is there anyone at the FBI agency to call?
We have. So we've called different agents that have also worked on my case, and then we called the chief. And according to her, she says she knows Miss Rachel very well. This is Granny called her, and she doesn't believe me. And so she says she will not look into my case.
The FBI, the chief.
The chief.
Interesting. Okay. All right. So do you have any other stories of when the police were helpful or when they weren't helpful?
Well, I mean, I had situations where like I remember one time I was hurt from home and I um, ended up calling the police, and they came and you could tell right away, didn't believe me. And they ended up calling DCFS on me, or CPS or whatever your state calls it. And I vowed at that point, like, I'm done. I am not going to call the police ever again. Like, this is ridiculous. And Granny actually hit that point too. She has given up on justice. And I mean, I've had police officers tell me, you will watch too many movies. Um, I had one guy who, it was the same time I had been hurt at home. He went to neighbors and he said, "Hey, did you see anything over at this house? We don't think anything happened, but we're supposed to come here and ask." I mean, literally just blowing smoke. One of the times, like I was always told scratch, like if you're attacked, you scratch to get DNA under your fingernails. And I did that and I told them that, but they had already made up their mind that they weren't going to look into it. And so Granny pushed and she said, "You need to take the evidence from under her fingernails." And the guy's like, "And compare it to who?" She says she doesn't even know who did it. So how are we supposed to check the evidence? Oh my gosh, my house is just got filled with people all of a sudden. Sorry. But yeah, so it's been a roller coaster ride. We've even had officers who have contacted us and wanted to interview us, and then literally the next day not return our phone calls. And in the moment, they believe they're invested. And it's almost as if there is something that just shuts it down every single time and makes it stop. And a lot of times, too, anytime I would go to the police station, I would become more unsafe after that. And so I mean, I know personally that there are some cops who were involved. Um, I do believe that somebody uh, stopped the case, keeps it from going further. But I also know there are great police officers out there who want to do good for us, but either they're not trained or they are not equipped. They don't have the time. I mean, I know officers are overworked, or they've just not been trained. And on trafficking or trauma or abuse or whatever, when you see somebody and you're interviewing them, most of the time they're going to be fidgety, they're going to have trouble answering questions, they're going to be breathing hard or whatever. And that might look like somebody who's lying when in actuality it's proof of PTSD.
Right. So having a trauma informed officer is really important.
Yes.
But the other place that I would imagine somebody would go if they've been hurt is the hospital. Have you gone to the hospital, and has that been helpful or not helpful?
It wasn't. So I had one doctor who would not look at me because he was scared. He didn't know if somehow it would make him unsafe. I had one nurse walk in and find out what was going on, and she actually said to me, "Oh wow, this is way better than strep throat." I had one lady who wouldn't look at me because she was afraid she would have to get called into court, and she didn't want to do that. I had one doctor say to me, "Are you trafficked because you like the drugs?" I mean, all sorts of things, all sorts, because people just don't understand.
Wow. Okay. And so if somebody is out there and they're like, sounds a bit hopeless, like, who can I go to? Right. What would you recommend that they do? What can they control in this situation?
So a lot of victims are trying to change legislation because you need to be able to have somebody with you when you're talking to the police. You need to have somebody who's trauma informed. Every police station should have that. They should have a female officer that can talk with victims. I mean, I'm not going to say don't go to the police, because in a lot of cases, the police do come through for you. Um, I think, I think you have to try. You have to, because when you don't, then the abuse just flourishes. And um, at least me going forward is saying, I'm not going to put up with this. And it makes the abusers a little bit more scared, I hope. Um, but it's going to add more trauma. It's going to be more difficult than it should be. But at the end of the day, you have to try, and you got to hope that you end up with a good officer.
Absolutely. And maybe even advocate for yourself, or you have somebody else that can advocate for you to have a female, to have a counselor present, to have somebody else in the room and see what you can finagle. I think a lot of times you put into that situation and you're already scared
Mhm.
and maybe not even able to advocate for yourself. So bringing someone like Granny or someone trusted adult along is helpful.
Yes.
The other thing I would recommend is writing everything down yourself, like we got to document everything because we don't quite believe that they're going to keep that evidence. And so
Mhm.
I know you gave them journals and things like that, and now you no longer have them. And so I say, if you are going to physically give them any evidence that you have, give them copies or make copies of it and keep the originals yourself. But it sounds like we just don't know. And so you can document everything yourself in your own notebook about when you went, what happened, because all it takes is a one-liner in your note from somebody that says, they could take an hour conversation and put it into one line in your note, and then that's what is on record, and it really doesn't matter what actually happened.
Right. Absolutely. And I know that, I mean, the cops are probably doing the best that they can with being overworked and not understanding. Um, but I mean, you hear of like child porn cases, and they are unable to get to certain ones because other ones are worse. And so I need to deal with these, but those child porn case, I just don't have time. And so that's just, it's difficult. It's very difficult.
Right, right. All right, so let's move on to the church, because I know the church was also a place where you went to get support when it was time to come forward and share your story and start the healing journey. So tell me a bit about what you expected to experience at the church and what you did experience.
Well, I experienced people who cared, people who, it broke their heart to see me broken, but not equipped to handle this. And a lot of people became overwhelmed very quickly. It became more than they were equipped to take on. And so, and they didn't know how, they didn't know what to do. And I think, what I really needed was, at that point, I didn't need them to get me justice. I didn't need them to fix the problem. I needed them to love me. And so everybody wants to do the justice though, and they want to fix the problem. But as church members, I mean, what I really just needed was love. And so when Granny came along, that is what she was able to do. Now, she did push for justice and that stuff too, but it started with loving me and equipping me to get stronger. Um, I dealt with some people who, when they became overwhelmed, it then became my fault in a way. Like, I heard things that were difficult to hear, that maybe I'm not doing things right. Maybe I'm not trusting God enough. There's a reason why these people won't leave you alone. Maybe it has to do with something I'm doing. Where's your faith? You just need to let this stuff go, that sort of thing. And it was extremely difficult to hear those words from a Christian, because I don't know, I guess you hope that you're not going to have to explain yourself to them too. You're hoping that just your story alone is enough. And so um, it added, I don't want to say trauma, but it just added a layer of disappointment, I think, and a feeling of isolation. I remember going to different outings and different Bible studies and things. And, we're praying for people. you're in a family in a sense, and you're encouraging each other through difficult things. But I felt like my stuff was too difficult to share. And so I knew I just needed to keep it in because it was not something these women were equipped to carry. And it was very isolating at times. And so, any chance that I got to be around a community like with 90 Day U-Turn and have a community of people who get it, um, it gives you life. It like gives you a freedom to use your voice in a different way.
Yeah, absolutely. Tell me some of so it sounds like with the church, just loving you was what you needed.
Mhm.
That was the request at that time, whether it was spoken or not. It really was just like, I just need a hug and I need someone to sit with me. You don't even have to say a word.
Yeah.
What are some of the things that you heard? I know you've had several churches respond differently that was not helpful.
Well, for some of the churches, it felt like they believed, but it was almost embarrassing, is kind of how it felt. I don't know if that's how they felt, but it was very kept hush hush. And they might have been doing that for my own feeling of normalcy, but it just felt like I was a little bit of an embarrassment. And so I had one church, though, that they heard my story, they heard what was going on, and they allowed me to speak and actually have an event and share my story. But it was considered outside of the church. They didn't want it to be functioned by the church. It could be in the church, but not like they wanted to keep that separation. And now I'm involved in a church where they want to be not just involved, they want to be like, they want to consider this ministry one of their missions. They want updates. They love hearing updates and how things are going. They believe me, they support me, they support my family. And it blew me away. I didn't ever expect a church to stand behind me like that. And it's been really cool.
You know what's interesting is I think you're right. I think a lot of times we say, we're not going to talk about it because we want you to be normal, or we want you to fit in normally or something like that. So keeping this part of your life quiet in the shadows will help with that. But it sounds like actually being able to talk about all the real stuff is actually more normal, more inclusive than pretending like it didn't exist.
That's true. And because as I share my normal, because this is my normal, this story is who I am. When I share it with people, even just down at the pool or wherever, they have their normal, their life too. And being able to share that with people is what God, I think, wants us to do. That way we're not alone in what we're dealing with.
This is not like, I don't know if this is a good example or not, but I'm reminded of a time when I was in high school and I knew a friend, like not a good close friend, but like a friend, acquaintance, kind of in our social circle. I knew her uncle that passed away, and I had heard that. And I thought, do I say something? Do I not say something? Do you pretend like everything's normal? Like, do you stuff it? Just ignore it. And I went up and I gave her a hug. And I didn't say anything. I just said, I'm so sorry. And I feel like that is what she needed at that time. Yeah. Because sometimes we avoid talking about the hard stuff because we don't want it to feel uncomfortable. But that's why we started this podcast, is to talk about the hard stuff, because we've all got it. And sometimes normal is being able to share all parts of ourselves.
Yeah, absolutely. And keeping it quiet and changing who you are to make other people comfortable. I mean, I think that leads to things like depression and anxiety and, some of those things that just bubble up in your heart because you're not being real. You're not being yourself. And even if yourself involves hard stuff, being real is healthier than stuffing it.
Right. And now that you share your story frequently, you have people come up to you quite often. And I know you've heard some stories, and we're probably going to do a whole podcast of like what to say to a survivor and what not to say to a survivor. But the church often does more damage than it does support and help on this healing journey. Can you share some of the things that have shocked you?
Yeah, so I feel like for me, with the church situation, I felt like one church felt like I was embarrassing or whatever, and it could have been that that was my own thing that I put on myself, and that they never said anything terrible to me or anything like that. I think they were trying to be supportive, but they just didn't know how. So I feel like I have been blessed in the different churches that I have been to, who have tried their very best to be what they could for me. But then I talk to other women who come to me and they're like, yeah, so I guess I just need to turn the other cheek because that's what my pastor told me to do. And I was like, what? No, like, yes, forgive because that gives you peace and you need that. But the turning the other cheek part, we're talking about a wolf. And God never said, turn the other cheek to a wolf. You want the wolves gone. Whereas the church is saying, turn the other cheek, forgive, keep them in the congregation. And what that does is that makes the victim want to leave, and they do leave, and they feel outed or ousted. Um, I've had scripture that they told me was told to them about like, forgiveness, but then also something about the brother. Don't take your brother to law. There's a scripture about that. And um, but they had never heard the scripture about tie a millstone around the neck of somebody or God will tie a millstone around the neck of somebody who hurts a child. And that's better than what they will actually experience. They didn't hear those scriptures. They didn't hear about what happens when you hurt a child. They just heard that they needed to be quiet. One girl that I know told the pastor because the guy was in her church and he said, thank you for telling me, but you need to never talk about this again and move on. And a lot of times for victims, they then think that the feelings of the pastor is the same feelings God has. And so it really makes your view of your worth and your self-image go even further down, because not only is this what the abuser thinks of me, it's what the church thinks of me, and it's even what God thinks of me. And so it changes everything.
Wow. And let's talk about friends and family and even school, because I know throughout the years and I want to say spoke up, but I know that it wasn't a linear story where you said, this is happening. It was in bits and pieces. It was, I'm in pain, but I don't quite know why. There was just a lot of things bubbling to the surface that you might not have been able to explain, but yet other people did see them. So tell me about how you encountered friends, family in your school.
Yeah, and that's difficult for me to talk about just because I never want to shame anybody else. That's not my goal with coming forward and using my voice. I don't want to point out somebody who maybe didn't believe, or um, even though it was hurtful and it has impacted me greatly, I feel like God's not necessarily calling me to point those people out. But throughout my life, and especially when I was a kid, it seemed like the ones who believed me were silenced, and the ones who didn't believe me were the loudest. And so justice was never even talked about when I was a kid. And I have found out since I was older that there were some people who had fought for me, but they were then either harassed or threatened or whatever themselves. And so, I'm appreciative of those people, and thankful that they put their neck out there for me. But at the time, as a kid, I didn't know any of that. All I knew was I was being silenced and not believed. And so, there were times I even wrote in my journal, I would write out prayers to God, apologizing for ever saying anything, because I felt like maybe I really was sinning. Maybe this is what the perpetrators meant, that when they said nobody would believe me, it came true. And I think it's so frustrating for me when I see these victims who want to come forward and they want to share their story, and their reasons for not doing it, for like, they won't be believed, police won't do anything, it'll tear apart their family, they'll lose their friends. A lot of times that does happen. And that's what sucks. Like, I can't change that. I can't change that the coming forward does those things. But the fact is, it wasn't them coming forward that caused it. It was the abuse, the abuser that caused all of that chaos. But it sucks because as the victim, you feel like it's you. You feel like because you're the one coming forward and bringing it to light. And anytime that my encouragement to other people, anytime somebody comes forward, just know they're not lying, because they're about to lose a whole lot by coming forward, and they are going to gain a whole lot. I don't want to discourage people from coming forward, because what I have gained is amazing. And I now know who I am, whose I am. I am stronger than I've ever been. I am able to fight flashbacks and triggers like never before. I have friends who are real and strong and great Christian people in my life. And so, I've grown so much by coming forward. But if you picture in your mind coming forward, getting justice, and then moving on, that may not be the case. But what it does do is it strengthens that muscle of using your voice and gaining that confidence. And that's what we lost in the abuse. And so whether we win or lose in justice, we're winning by simply using our voice.
Right, because that's part of healing work, is taking that darkness out of the shadows and starting to process through it.
Yeah.
And so even just by telling one person, that's one step forward.
Yeah. And the Bible says there's power in our testimony. And I think that's true. I think there's power in our words. God did not cause me to be trafficked, but he did give me this story that he now can use for good. And when I share it, it gives other people a chance to use their voice as well and share their story. And before long, this country is going to be erupting with stories, because there's so many people suffering in silence. And if we keep giving them a microphone to be able to shout it, it's going to be shouting from the mountaintops.
So one last category of people that we haven't talked about is counselors. And oftentimes, again, when you've been hurt, you think, I'm going to go to the hospital and get DNA or the kit done or whatever the case may be. And then they'll go to the police. And then really the healing journey starts, which is going to a counselor and starting to process and work through the lies that you start to believe.
Yeah, so I have had some amazing counselors. I have had one man who ended up passing away unexpectedly from a condition during our counseling time, was probably one of the best. Like, he was able to explain to both me, my husband, Granny, about why I disassociate, why I have like the anxiety, why I react the way I do. And simply hearing that from somebody of, this is why you feel this way, it just helps. I don't know, like, you don't feel as crazy, because I think anytime you're dealing with trauma, your first thought is, well, nobody knows what I'm feeling. Well, when a counselor says, actually, this is normal, it's easier to heal when you know it's normal. And so that was great. I had counselors who've been really good about, the crisis moments and getting me the help that I needed right in that moment. They were able to equip Granny with what she needed to maybe help me more on like a daily encouragement basis versus, I'd only see my counselor once a week. One thing for a long time, medicine was not something that helped me from what I was experiencing. I had tried a couple times to help with like depression and anxiety. And so majority of this time, like, I am literally coping with my own, like, whatever my counselor's giving me. And having that rapport with them, that trust with them, gave me an ability to then trust their coping techniques as well. And so, yeah, I had good relationships. I had times when I yelled at my counselor. I had one lady where I threw something. That was not my greatest moment, but she didn't take it personally, thankfully. It was just part of the problem or process at that point. But yeah, I haven't experienced too many bad. I have had one lady who she got scared, and she told me she would no longer see me because I had been followed to her counselor's office. And so she dropped me at that point, and that was extremely difficult because I had gotten close to her. Um, so, I mean, yeah, I think counseling is huge. I don't think it's everything. I think a community around you is just as important as that weekly visit, because that weekly visit isn't going to drastically change your life. Um, but I personally think everybody needs counseling. So
I do too. We all have life, you guys, that needs to, we all need to process whatever we're experiencing.
yes.
Well, and I know one counselor even was the one that helped you write your book.
Oh, yes. Oh, my goodness. Yes. And so I had given her my book in like just loose leaf paper form, basically. And she read it and she's like, Rachel, people need to read this. They need to know what's going on. And I was like, yeah, yeah, okay, thanks. She goes, no, like, I'm serious. We're going to publish this thing. And so she actually published it for me. And I paid her back once I was able to make some from the book. And yeah, I never would have probably published it had it not been for her encouragement. But she knew that this type of stuff's happening all the time. It's just not talked about.
Right, right. So tell me about the importance of a survivor being believed. And then I know we also want to talk about the Jezebel spirit of those who are lying. And you've experienced people coming to you, sharing their stories, but yet they weren't being truthful. And so as counselors and churches and family and friends and police were all kind of trying to navigate, like, what is true, what is going on. And when you're in the midst of drama all the time, and I say I in my programs, we talk about living in the world of dreams and living in the world of drama. And drama is really just like crisis all of the time. And when you're in, and police are always responding to crisis, and counselors are often, people don't come to us when they're having good days, right? So you're kind of living in that crisis space a lot. And so you hear a lot of things. Anyway, let's talk about the importance of being believed, and then what do you do, or how can you tell if someone's not telling the truth?
Yeah. So as far as being believed, when you are not believed, that's a whole other form of trauma. It just is, like, it's devastating. I just remember times literally sitting there feeling the hands of the abuse, seeing the images of the abuse, remembering it so detailed, and sharing it with somebody and them saying, there's no way that could have happened. And I mean, whether I have enough proof, it just didn't seem to matter. And so I know everybody has their reasons and has their own stories and backgrounds, but when you choose to say to somebody, there's no way that could happen, or that's not true, that's not how it went, it's devastating. It just is. And again, your worth seems to go way down. Because not only was I not worth enough to not be abused, I'm not worth enough to even be believed that I was abused. And that sinks in, unfortunately, and that's not what God wants. That's not what anybody should have to deal with. When you're dealing with the trauma and you're dealing with the impact of the trauma, to then also have to deal with, well, I need to get everybody to understand this really did happen. But a victim shouldn't have to deal with that on top of things. For a long time, I felt like I needed everybody to believe me. I felt like that was something that I had to prove, because I was so tired of hearing there's no way that happened. And as I've gotten stronger, as I've done your 90-day U-turn and have become less of a people pleaser and things like that, I've been able to be okay now with when people say they don't believe me. That's fine, because I know my truth and I can stand firm on that. But when I'm just coming out of the fire, I need somebody to stand there and say, I see the fire, I see it, and it's not okay. I know there was a point in my childhood when the spark left my eyes, when I changed. I know it, and I know why it happened, and I know people had to have noticed. And so it's just difficult to then say, no, that's not true. That didn't really happen. So being believed is crucial. And I want to tell victims, if you're not believed, keep going to more people, because somebody's going to believe you. Don't give up. And then as far as, yes, so I have had a situation where I was helping with an organization rescuing trafficking victims. And we got a phone call, and it was a church who was coming alongside this girl who had been kept in a barn since she was 4 years old. She was a breeder. She had had 13 kids, didn't know where any of them were. She was pregnant when she got to the church. And we were going up there to try to help this lady. I mean, she didn't even know what an egg was. Like, she didn't know what didn't know anything. And she was too afraid to talk to some of our male investigators. And so she was talking only to me. And she was sharing details about abuse that I had been through. And it was difficult for me, but it felt like it was worth it because I knew I was at least helping somebody by reliving some of this myself. And so she's sharing things with me, and through conversation, I start to get some red flags. And I don't know whether to voice it to anybody. I don't know if I'm right or I'm wrong, but something's not quite adding up in her story. But then I also knew there was a lot of things that probably didn't add up in my story. And so we kept going, and part of me was like, if just 1 ounce of what she's saying is true, this girl needs help. And so we kept going, and we drove up there actually, and it was like 8 hours away from us. And we sat down and had a conversation with her and the church women, and was able to get some more information. And by the time it was all said and done, we found out none of it was true. None of what she had shared was true. And she wasn't even pregnant when she had gotten to the church. She had faked a delivery, a stillbirth, ashes to, like, they did a ceremony. She had literally faked all of that. To the point where when we first addressed the church women and said, hey guys, like, here's the proof that none of what she's saying is true. Like, we found pictures of her with her family just a few years prior at Christmas. And, she wasn't living in a barn. She actually had at least a high school education, if not further. But she had some stays in mental health facilities. But the church women didn't believe us. They thought we were part of the bad guys because they were so engulfed in her story that it just had to be true. I mean, they were about to buy her a new car and all these different things. Well, and we found out the church prior to that, she had a different story, and the church prior to that, she had a different story. And so stories like that ruin it for ones who are real victims. And it makes it to where, honestly, when we had that situation come up, it was helpful for me because, I was angry at first, but it was helpful because I could see it from the police perspective. They have moments like this where somebody just completely gives them an off the wall story, and they dive in and they help and help and help, only to find out it wasn't real. And so I guess I had more compassion for the police after that and was able to see it from their perspective. So I feel like it was a good thing I went through that. But it ruins it for those of us who have an off the wall story, because my story it's difficult for people to grasp. But I did have one police officer who told me and Granny one time that perpetrators will purposefully do the craziest crap to their victims, because then when they go to like repeat it and share it to the police, it sounds crazy and they're not going to be believed. And so it goes to the benefit of the perpetrators, that it does sound crazy. But yeah, it's out there. You do have people who are out there looking for attention, and for whatever reason come up with this story, whether it's money or I don't know what it is. But it's difficult to understand for sure. They need help, just in a different way.
Right. I was going to say, if somebody were to do that and lie about being hurt themselves, they do need, there still needs to, that's not okay either. So they still need to, but it sounds like the reality is to investigate. That's how you kind of know what's happening, as to the best of your ability, is to investigate. And there were times when you told people and they were like, interesting, and did nothing. Even as a child, it sounds like, I know there's people, moms that went to the school or the principal, and no investigations ever really took place back then. And
Yeah.
it sounds like at the end of the day, if you have somebody that's saying that they've been injured, if they've been hurt, then investigation is step one.
Yes, absolutely. And I think nowadays you're starting to hear of when like teachers and principals don't report it, they are starting to get in trouble. And that's how it should be. I
Right.
mean, they need to report this stuff.
I have a friend who told us after your event that she was a new teacher years ago and saw some inappropriate behavior from a male teacher at school. And she started taking notes and documenting everything that she saw. She then went to the principal, who did nothing and said, "Don't worry about it." A year or two later, she ends up at a different school and sees that same guy. In fact, she saw him alone with a child in a dark room by themselves. And she documented everything. And then she went to that principal who did something. And they ended up going to trial. Once the story came out, like there's a plethora of kids, handful of kids that said, "Oh, that happened to me." And so they're at trial. And again, this is coming from that teacher who says the school, is it the school board, the union? It was the union people who were saying, "You know what? You went around chain of command and you will probably never find a job in our district again." And she basically was berated for bringing an abuser to light. And that abuser did end up getting 12 years, which is great.
Mhm.
But the attack she felt as somebody who did share is, again, it's shocking. You just can't imagine that happening, but that happened in our town. And it's probably happening more than we would like to admit.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, in my case, they went to the school board, they went, or the superintendent, and nothing was done and they were shut down. And it is so sad that regular people react that way. I don't understand.
Right. No, none of it makes sense. And that's when we've said you cannot make sense of crazy. Like,
No,
holy cow. We
no.
can't even try to make it make sense because it just doesn't. But the reality is that there's a lot of kids out there, there's a lot of adults out there that have experienced some really hard things. And we think that we are going to go to these external search places to finally get the help we need or to finally get the justice. But although creating a community around you is one of the healthy next steps in healing, what have you found as being, one of the keys to you feeling like, all right, I'm on the healing journey now and I'm 3 steps further along?
Well, so it wasn't that long ago. I started really diving into how God felt about my abusers, because I'm not receiving justice here on earth as far as what's been done to me. In fact, I feel like I have faced injustice after injustice after injustice. However, as I start like diving into this, and the reason being is from what I had been taught about God and about, sin and whatever, God loves my abuser just as much as he loves me. And that was hard for me to grasp. And so as I started researching and reading the Bible, I read through the book of Jeremiah. And if you've read that book, you know that God literally just shouts at his people and is angry and upset and hates what they're doing. And at that point, I realized God can love somebody and not like somebody at the same time. And so seeing his anger towards the actions of his people in the book of Jeremiah helped me realize God's anger towards the people who have hurt me. And it kind of just helped open my eyes to, number one, God's character. He's a just God. And whether I get justice here on earth or not, I know there will be justice in heaven. I know that all that was done to me will be made right. And whoever deserves hell will deserve hell. But until then, knowing that he's got it all in his hands has helped me heal now, because yeah, I mean, I don't want people to feel like they shouldn't go to the police, that they shouldn't fight for justice, that they shouldn't use their voice because it's going to be hard. Yeah, it's going to be hard because we live in an unjust world. But when we silently keep in what happened to us, that's not going to help anybody. And that's not going to give the person across the street who's watching, who's also been hurt, the strength to maybe come forward too. So I don't want anybody to take away from today's podcast with don't go to the police because they're not going to believe you. I want them to understand it is going to be hard. And I want people who hear my story and think, well, why don't you just go to the police? Well, we've tried a dozen times and it's not turned out like we hoped. But you know what? God still has a plan and God is still working. I know He's worked a ton in my life, and I do hope that He's working in the lives of the abusers and that someday they will come to know Him truthfully. Um, but yeah, it's just we live in an unjust world, but we serve a just God. And so that's what's helped me probably the most.
Yeah, that's beautiful. That's beautiful. And I think you started taking the learning and the healing into your own hands a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
And you reached out to people until you found those that you could confide in with your counselors, with Granny, with people at your church, within your circle. And instead of thinking that someone else could flip a switch and make everything better for you, you started that healing journey yourself. And I think that's key, is taking, they say control the controllables. There's a lot of things we can't control, but if we can take 100% responsibility for at least what we can control, and using the skills in the meantime, calling and texting Granny when you needed to, reaching out, and I think all of that is you saying, all right, I'm not going to choose to let them win. I'm going to take steps each and every day.
Yeah. And a lot of times I'd take those little steps thinking I was getting nowhere. And then when I look back, I see how far I actually had come. And that's a neat moment. So don't give up if you feel like you're just taking baby steps. It's getting you somewhere.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, we've got a lot of topics on our list for the next few weeks, including what to do if you're in that crisis moment, including, then I think we're going to go into the process and the mindset of trauma. I know you've mentioned trauma brain quite a bit. So post any, if you have a topic that you want us to talk about, post that in the description box below. If you want to hear more of Rachel's story, order her book, Open Blind Eyes. And you can listen to the podcast Dreamcast. That's all in the show notes or description box below as well. And then we do have some opportunities, because we know that when people hear Rachel's story, oftentimes they're moved to action, just like I was no, this cannot happen. We turn into mama bears and we want to do something. And so we want to give you the opportunity to do something too. And there's a few ways you can do that. First of all, you can support and sponsor a survivor. There's a link down below. And what that does is it's a scholarship to 90-Day U-Turn and a retreat with really only a cohort of survivors. We typically just take 10 girls at a time, and we do this twice a year. We'll also have a waiting list if that's something you personally are interested in working in being a part of. We'll have that link below, as well as a way to support and sponsor a survivor within that program. And then we also have something called the Granny program. And you've heard Rachel mention Granny several times. And if you read her book, you know all about Granny, who is really one of the first people to reach her hand down into that dark pit and help pull Rachel out. And a granny is somebody who becomes a part of that community. And so because we know that it's not going to be fixed, right, in just going to the police or just one counseling session, or we want a community of people surrounding a survivor of any sort of trauma. So you've got just another person in your circle, another person that cares about you that you can reach out to if you would like to. And so those who go through 90-Day U-Turn at the end are getting partnered with a granny, and it's really, really special. I'm excited to see this program flourish. Rachel, do you have anything you want to add about the granny program? Because I know it's your baby. It's close to your heart.
It's very close to my heart. So I want anybody who's interested in being a granny to know that we will support you. Like, you won't be thrown into the fire with a survivor and expected to change their world. You are literally just one of many who is pouring into them, but yet your impact can have a huge effect on them. And so we are there to support you. We will give you tools and all the equipment that you need to be able to help them in the best way possible. So, a lot of people have a heart for it, but they don't feel like they are equipped to do it. Truly, you just need a heart like Jesus, and we'll be there to support you, just like we're there to support them every step of the way. So if you have fear alongside possibly wanting to do it, just trust that it won't be as bad as you think. It'll be a beautiful, beautiful experience.
Yeah. Well, what's really cool is Rachel's creating a workbook so that the survivor and granny can go through it together to get to know each other and to kind of have a topic of discussion when you start the process. And so we'll also have meetings with the grannies once a month or once every other month, just to have a place where you can talk to other people, get feedback. And I know sometimes, at least for me, when you hear some stories, you're shocked. You're shocked, you're in awe, and we need to talk about it too. And so getting the grannies together is a part of that program. And then, because the survivor has gone through 90-day U-turn, we know them well enough to be able to pair them with somebody. And we've already been able, it's not a blind interaction or a blind connection. So we've got links down below if you are a survivor and are interested in being a part of 90-day U-turn, as well as if you want to be a granny and be a part of that granny program. And Rachel or I will reach out to you and we'll get that process started.
Awesome.
All right. Well, I'm going to end with an I declare, because, we're all on a journey, no matter where you are on the journey. I always say we're living in the ing, like it's happening. We're all in the midst of that. And so whether you feel like you are just climbing out of the hole, or whether you're 3 steps ahead of where you were last year, just to know that we're all in this together. And we pray that Stop Suffering in Silence can be one of your communities, and that we can create a community together where we all can grow. So I am going to end with an I declare. It's our little exclamation point at the end of a powerful discussion. So I declare I experience God's faithfulness. I do not worry. I do not doubt. I keep my trust in him, knowing that he does not fail me. I give birth to every promise God put in my heart, and I become everything God created me to be. This is my declaration, and this is my declaration for you. Have an awesome day, my friends.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you so much for listening to this powerful episode of Stop Suffering in Silence. If you are interested in booking Rachel to speak at your school, your church, or on your podcast, then please email OpenBlindEyes@protonmail.com. If you are interested in sponsoring a survivor on their healing journey and would like to donate to Stop Sis, then please check out the link in the description box or show notes below, or you can email stopsis@protonmail.com. And finally, if you are currently suffering in silence, or you know somebody who is, whether they're dealing with a current trauma or one from the past, then we will always recommend that you reach out to your local resources and find a counselor that you can trust, because nobody is meant to suffer alone. Have an amazing week, and thank you for being here.